this is our third episode. I'm excited. So thanks to everyone who's joining us. A little bit about us. We're a couple of guys who discuss political and cultural issues which are captured, or at least we believe that have been captured and shaped by a digital age. We aim to, offer nuanced perspective on the challenges and opportunities that face people and communities worldwide. There's the 24-hour news cycle, and with the ever-evolving digital landscape, we just want to address the impacts of social media, technology, and activism, and the role that they play in political modern discourse.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, we're here to try to make the best citizens, as a way I've put it previously, as we can. We want to make sure that political and media literacy is at an all-time high, so that way we can engage in healthy and productive discussion, so that way we can improve our societies, because I think most people would share the sentiment that there are things to be improved.
Yes. Well, we have a lot to improve this week. So
yeah, definitely. So I'm ready to get started whenever you are.
Yeah, let's launch right in. Do you want to take the lead? We're going to discuss Katie Britt, first of all.
Yeah, I'll definitely take the lead on that. So for anyone who may have listened to our previous episodes, the last episode actually, we did leave a little bit of a notice to it at the very end of the episode. So definitely make sure to check that out if you haven't already. But we urged people after our discussion about the State of the Union to watch Senator Britt's reaction video that she posted, I think, what was it, like an hour or so after? Not long after it ended.
Yeah, it was basically immediately.
Yeah, so it immediately hit the news, and boy, did it leave a lot for the internet especially, and for people like us to make, well, one, to make fun of, but also to have commentary on, because I think it has kind of some broader scale implications on the way political discourse is done, and sort of the messaging from some of the, the GOP, the Republican Party. But essentially, to do kind of a generalized breakdown of the video, it immediately starts with this a little bit precariously zoomed in shot of this woman sitting in her kitchen, and she makes sure to mention to you that it is indeed her kitchen, using terms like, we've welcomed you and invited you into our home tonight to sit down, and the families of America need to have a discussion. And right as soon as that stage is set, she launches into this sort of, I don't know how you can softly lambast someone, but that's basically what it was. This odd paradoxical tone where she almost sounds like she has a bit of a fear in her voice, where she's, she's having to whisper under some sort of duress about the state of the country under Joe Biden's presidency. Espousing things about how Biden is, what we just saw in the State of the Union was the result of a career politician who's blatantly out of touch with the average American family and the average American person. Makes commentary about the border crisis, which, is at the forefront of everyone's mind, especially in the GOP right now. Espousing issues with Biden's economy and Bidenomics, a phrase that she referred to multiple times during this video. And it's just this really weird, sort of off-putting, and it's not going to be just us that share that opinion. She was, let's just put it how she was roasted for this video by even some people on her side.
Did you see what sassy bitch Biden had to say about it?
I actually didn't see his response. I watched the SNL skit that Scarlett Johansson did, and then I've watched a few other talk show hosts talk about it and some political pundits, but for some reason, Biden's response specifically escaped me.
Biden's response, I think, is the most goated one. He said that he believes that she tried really hard to give her best, and it was a great performance.
Because
let's be honest, it was a performance. It was
definitely,
like, it's performative outrage, which is just oversaturated in politics right now.
Yeah, and apparently she's not very good at it, because like I said, she has this harshly competing tone of her voice with the nature of her message. I think at one point I paused the video and I made a note here to myself. How can someone simultaneously look fearful, enraged, but have the weirdest, most psychotic serial killer grin on their face at the same time? It was
yeah, it's the uncanny valley of like plucking at heartstrings. It's weird, man.
Yeah, she's sitting here talking to all mothers out there in the country about, we have to band together and take our country back because our president doesn't understand us and doesn't have our interests at heart. And then, she starts launching into some of these crazy stories about when discussing the border crisis. She mentions this person that she had met that was a victim of cartel gang violence where they raped her for days and days and months on end. Come to find out later that the particular woman that she was referring to, the events that she was detailing, not only happened about 20 years ago during the Bush administration, but they also weren't even accurately recounted. The victim herself was in an interview that corrected this woman's recounting of her experience, which just adds layers upon layers of, what the hell is going on? How could you possibly, 1, bring this up, 2, bring it up with a weird smile, and 3, get it wrong?
Yeah, so for the audience, let's slow it down for a sec so that they can try and find this interview. We won't use the lady's name out of respect for her because she did mention that she felt like Mexican politicians had used her as a political device previously, and she felt like that's what this particular individual, Katie Britt, was doing to her again. But CNN, Rafael Romo, he sat down with her, so you can find the interview if you want. I made notes as to all the things that the senator got wrong. Did you want to go over them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So she had espoused that this woman had basically been kidnapped and violated for days and days and days at a time by a cartel, right? Well, the first thing that she got wrong was the woman wasn't trafficked by drug cartels. She was trafficked by a pimp who worked specifically for one family whose sole job was to entrap vulnerable women and get them into a prostitution pipeline. The second thing that she got wrong was that she was never actually trafficked in the US, which is what the senator had suggested. The third thing was that she had been held captive from 2004 to 2008, which was under a Republican administration, which you just mentioned, right? Bush, I believe, specifically. And then the last thing that she got wrong, when I think this is like kind of the most damning thing, it's that they never actually met one-on-one. Like, think about that for a second. This woman inferred heavily that she sat down with this woman, right? What actually happened, apparently, was there was a border activism event. There was lots of government officials, lots of activists, lots of people there sharing their stories. She happened to meet her in a crowd of people, and she happened to hear her story. She didn't talk to her or sit down on a one-on-one. So I think that just goes to show that this is like super, super dishonest, the framing of it. Unfortunately, I think the damage was already done. I think it kind of proves the victim correct when she said that she's being used as a puppet for political means, because a bunch of the MAGA groups clipped that story and were circulating it around. So unfortunately, she did end up kind of yet again being utilized for some sort of other means.
Yeah, no, it's completely disgusting. It highlighted kind of the two main things that I feel about the GOP or about the Republican Party in general right now. One, they are always completely tone deaf when they're trying to reach across to demographics that aren't already voting for them. And two, they feel like they have such loyalist voters that it's like, are they trying hard and failing, or are they not trying hard? This speech made it impossible, or this video, made it impossible for me to tell which was which at times, because it was so bad that it made it hard for me to believe that it was not, like, did they not think that this was going to be terrible? Did they have too much confidence in this woman? Or are they just, like I said, are they this tone deaf? Like, oh, if we just do the whole matronly appeal to all mothers across the country, then we'll drag these people that are undecided over to our side because, we'll throw out continued access to in vitro fertilization at the end, and that'll sort of be the cherry on top. And, hopefully they'll forget some of the other things that we said, but hopefully they'll be horrified enough to vote for us next time.
I do think it shows what a monster this woman actually is, and like what these people by and large in politics are like. I mean, if you really like stop for a second to twist the facts to suit your narrative, or if I'm being charitable, maybe she like didn't think that. Actually, no, that. I think she twisted the facts on purpose to suit her narrative, to infer that these things happened under Biden's administration. I think she's a parasite, and I think it's an absolute disgrace to not just politics, but to actual like victims of these kind of crimes.
Yeah, and I think it's a political technique that's used rhetorically on either side, but especially these days with Republicans. They bring up this horror story that comes up, and then when people do the bare minimum amount of research, which in this case they didn't even need to because the victim she was using as a pawn came out and denied, or not denied, but clarified a lot of things immediately, was that even if it has a slight, thinly veiled connection to the overall issue of the border in general, then somehow they will still entrench themselves into it proves our point, it's still a problem, it always has been, and it needs to stop, and that's why you have to vote for us. It's completely insane that they haven't come out and sort of put their tail between their legs over this, because it's such a blatant abuse of a horror story. And interestingly enough, I was doing a little bit more research. Apparently, the senator went on, I think it's Ted Cruz's podcast, something called like What's Happening with Ted Cruz or something akin to that. She was saying that Mike Johnson, the leader of the House, was actually telling her not to use the horror stories. He actually told her right before she went on that she should omit them because he felt that they were over the top. So apparently it was like a couple hours before the State of the Union started, she gets a call from Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell says, "You're gonna do the response video for us." Mike Johnson says at some point during that, "Hey, maybe don't do the horror story thing because that might not play super well." And then she goes and does it anyway, and then she's on this show, and she has this like sort of laughing, joking tone about it. She made a reference to, I think it was Marco Rubio had an infamous water bottle fiasco a few years ago in his similar type of video where he drank water before the video ended, and it was this big issue for some reason. And then even at the end of the show, they're joking about like, oh, how can I market this and what kind of merchandise can I make to play into this for my own personal political gain. So yeah, these people are bordering on the sociopathic.
Oh yeah, no, I think we're past the border. Like, that ship sailed. That's insane. I didn't see that. I might have to look into that. I did see. Are you familiar with Tommy Tuberman?
I have heard the name, but no, I'm not that familiar.
He's also a soul-sucking corporatist, but he basically was one of the first people when she started getting really railroaded for what she said. He stepped in to defend her, and this guy recently, or the other day, he had to walk his statements back, and then he proceeds to blame the GOP leadership for helping her with her script, right? But then, when the GOP was asked about it, a GOP spokesman threw her under the bus and was like, yeah, she totally went rogue. She went off her script. This isn't what we necessarily discussed. So I think it's really funny how a lot of these institutional relationships are totally, like, if you make a mistake or if something doesn't go the way they want, it's clandestine. They just disavow. I love it. I feel like we couldn't write.
Oh no, absolutely. Yeah, reality is far more illogical, irrational, and silly, to use a kind of an undertoned word, than anything I could possibly write down in a book.
Yeah, it was wild. And the fact that you're telling me that they want to make merchandise off of it is truly despicable. Like, I don't even have words for that.
Yeah,
it's just
like they were trying to laugh it off like it was sort of a joking reference, like they were making fun of these other events that happened. But I never give them that grace. I mean, honestly, these people have a proven track record of really believing the vitriol that they spread, especially through their rhetoric and for anything for political clout and their political gain. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they just did a completely terrible speech because they're like, well, you know, fuck it, who cares? Everyone that's going to vote for us is going to vote for us regardless of what horrible shit I just said, because they'll eat it up. I'll literally feed them shit and they'll eat it out of my hand willingly.
Yeah, I can't even follow that up because that's just true. I did want to make a point to say that I do have a lot of respect for that victim for being able to come forward multiple times to not just share her story but correct the record. I quoted her, and I was hoping that we could share that quote with the audience before we move on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay.
So she said, "It seems to me politicians only want an image. They only want a photo, and to me it's not fair." She underlined that by saying, "This is why at every opportunity I have, I try not to cooperate with politicians."
Wow.
So,
yeah.
And that's, I don't know.
Yeah, I would definitely give her a lot of credit for that, because anytime you're used as a political pawn, to me it seems like because your story is being put out there and publicized, there's a lot of hesitation to refute the people that may bastardize or misuse that story. Like, for example, with the State of the Union, we talked about all the political pawning that was going on there. Haven't heard as much reaction there. So to know that this woman was proud enough and strong enough to sort of dig in and say, no, you're abusing my life story, you're misrepresenting it, and this is why I don't like working with you types of people. I think that's really potent.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for letting me share that.
But that would transition into the next thing I was going to talk about, which is the Trump Bloodbath speech.
Ah, yes. Go ahead.
So, I mean, just to start off, it sounded a lot like pretty much every other speech that Trump has made recently. I don't know if it's just me, maybe you share this as well, but I'm not trying to play into the whole crazy, Trump has syphilis storyline or anything like that, but his cognition does seem declined to me. His ability to keep on a topic and string sentences together that are coherent and continuous does not seem to be as strong as it used to be back when he was president. Granted, again, as we've talked about multiple times, these dudes are both old. They're both either approaching 80 or over 80. So this is to be expected, but usually the narrative about the confusion and the stumbling and the stammering is all about Biden, but to me this speech was laden with Trump losing his train of thought and just filling it with noise. I don't know if you share that sentiment or not.
Yeah, to a degree I do. Like, you pretty much took the words out of my mouth. I was gonna be like, bro, they're 80. Like, they're old as they're gonna do old people's I think Trump has so much to say about any given thing that he won't finish a sentence. I feel like he's always been like that, and we're just seeing it really magnified now as he's getting older. And I would agree there is cognitive decline. But I guess that whole speech was weird. There was a bunch of stuff that I would want more clarity on, because I know a lot of people are saying, like, oh, he said, for instance, like, Obama beat Biden. Or, I'm sorry, Biden beat Obama in these states. And it's like, well, like, the way that it's presented is Obama's not fucking running, right? But I don't know if he meant in terms of votes. So there's no context to a lot of the shit that he just says. So
yeah,
I agree, I guess, with you.
Yeah, that was kind of like just the temporary pit stop that I have a lot more notes on it. The first thing that came to mind, just as like a knee-jerk reaction to the speech, was that there was a lot of noise that came out of his mouth, and I feel like a lot of it was just incoherent, unfalsifiable, but also unprovable information. He was just spouting off, pluralities and generalities that no one could actually have any tangible response to because he wasn't saying anything real. He wasn't saying anything substantive. He did make mention of the fact that his teleprompter was supposedly not working, or he was struggling to read his teleprompter. So people are going to use that as justification or like an easy out for him, but he literally uses it to his advantage to say that it's something about him that his political rival cannot do, which is, hey, isn't it so nice that you have a presidential candidate that doesn't need a teleprompter? And then he proceeds to go off the rails incoherently for 30 minutes. So, yeah. I don't know, man. I think you should stick to the teleprompter, but that's just me. As far as things that he said that were just blatantly, unprovable or just, completely, absurd, things like, Venezuela's got no crime now. Venezuela's crime is down 60%. It's like, well, I mean, last I checked, there's still the number one spot on the crime index for the entire planet. So, not sure where you're getting any of that information. Just, I feel like he doesn't really get any of his information from anywhere. So, but the main part, the reason that this speech is being talked about, is for one particular aspect of it, one piece of it that was blown up, reshared, retweeted, put on every news outlet that I've seen. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, etc., etc. Haven't seen anything not report on it, and that is the bloodbath portion.
And it's like, I think this is why you said it was an easy transition, because first Republicans twist something to fit a narrative, and now we've got liberals doing it.
Yeah, so to add a little bit of context, or to say, kind of exactly why we're bringing it up, the statement or the portion of the speech, Trump was talking about the state of the country, things that are on the horizon or things that are about to happen, and the fact that he is the one that would be there to prevent it from happening. The specific issue he was discussing at the time was Chinese manufacturing of automobiles in Mexico. He stated that they were building multiple large manufacturing plants for automotives. I think it was EVs specifically, in Mexico, because Mexico has become, and has been for a while actually, one of the largest manufacturers of automotive parts for the United States. But he was making it sound like that they were taking over the northern part of the country with these EV plants that they're building, and that they were going to try to take over Mexico, put in these manufacturing plants, and then sell these cars to American citizens and undercut automotive jobs, automotive industry in the US. To which he said he would put 100% tariffs on any and all vehicle sales between those two countries, especially ones manufactured through Chinese plants, and that if he wasn't elected, it would, quote, be a bloodbath. And now, the reason that this is important is because he was specifically referring to a bloodbath in the sense that the trade between these two countries and the automotive industry specifically would be a bloodbath.
It's an economic bloodbath.
Exactly, yeah. And, I'm not going to go into
That's if he wasn't elected, correct?
Yeah, he said he said I would stop it. I would put tariffs on it if I was elected. If I'm not, there's going to be a bloodbath. I'm not going to go as far as to say, like a lot of Republicans did, that bloodbath has this secondary definition that refers to an economic crisis, etc., etc. I'm not even saying that Trump wasn't maybe being a little bit ambiguous and a little bit of fear-mongering, but the outrageous response from Democratic, liberal, left-wing media to just soundbiting the bloodbath part and amplifying it to imply that he was directly calling for his voters to do more January 6th, to do another violent, bloody revolution across the country, it to me was absolutely disgusting and distasteful, and it's the epitome of empowering the guy who keeps saying that you make shit up about him, and you make shit up about him. You misrepresent a person who already says so many awful things, but you don't need to do this, and yet they did it like they always do it.
I mean, to me, it's just ridiculous. It's really cringe. just a really bad look for the media. That big L, I guess, stands for liberal because, let's be honest, it's like you said. I mean, how are you going to validate someone and give their entire electorate and voter base something to hyperfixate on to prove everything he's saying about you? Like, you're proving him right. This is why I say that Democrats want to lose, or as you say, to kind of walk me back, you say like they're perfectly fine with the outcome of losing.
Yeah, I mean, every single time I get stuck in a thought loop about how Democrats or how liberals respond to Trump, that's the only conclusion that I can reasonably draw. I mean, we're watching a guy do everything from, say things like, oh, I'm supported and endorsed by men like Viktor Orban, which is just an outrageous thing to say so pridefully. Hungarian
dictator, for the audience if they don't know. Guy's insane. He's really, his bread and butter is destabilization of institutions and consolidation of power. He was actually DeSantis' mentor at one point.
Yeah, which to me is, it's a whole field of red flags. I don't even think red flag is an appropriate.
Yeah, it's a minefield.
Minefield exactly. Is a better word. Yeah. So, he's all glowing over this endorsement from a dictator. And then halfway through the speech, he pulls out a piece of paper out of his pocket and reads this crazy snake poem. Did you remember that part where he's saying
he's done that for years? The snake poem with the old lady. Yeah. That's like classic Trump, man. I remember a couple of years ago when he was talking about coming back, he had a big audience together and he asked everyone, he's like, do you want to hear the snake poem? And everyone's like, yeah. It was wild, dude.
Yeah, so it's even, that makes it even crazier to me because it's like he's doing his own memes and his voter base is loving it, but he's applying it to different situations every time. So this time it was to, highlight the very real and very relatable parallel that it draws towards our issue at the border. To me, it gave me very strong Clint Eastwood talking to Obama vibes. It had the exact same energy of him talking to the empty chair with Obama in it. That's exactly what I got from it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I was going to say, the thing that also makes this really pathetic, I think is a good word, is that it's one thing to blame something like CNN or MSNBC or any of these, sort of left-leaning media institutions, like, oh, they're misrepresenting this information, they clearly have a bias, they want you to vote blue, blah, 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 right? That's one thing. But you can't just blame it on the media because the Vice President of the United States clipped this out of context and posted it herself. Then you had Biden on Twitter or X or whatever it was. I don't know if it's still there or if it got deleted, but his team, or I'm assuming it's not him, but his team posted that comment and then said that he was actively calling for another January 6th, like you said. So if the administration currently in charge of the country is clipping shit out of context and being intellectually dishonest, it's a wrap. I don't know what else to say. Like, if you lose, it's your fault. And I'm at a loss. Like, literally, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, I mean, I found a juicy little piece of media in response to it that I think perfectly highlights the issue. I mean, granted, you can't get worse than the incumbent president and his VP espousing the same sentiments. I think that's the pinnacle, like you said. But this MSNBC panel that they brought on to talk about it, and it's just a bunch of people, hardcore liberals, shaking their head, just
wagging the finger.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're saying like, no doubt about it. This is a call for a violent revolution should Trump not win the 2024 election. There was even a part that I quoted that was interesting. That was like, one of the guys on the panel said, if you didn't learn your lesson then you're gonna learn it now. And I'm like, okay, I'm
Get
sorry.
the out of here. There's no way.
I was like, I'm sorry, are you almost, it almost sounds like they're excited. Like they would be so vindicated if these actions happened that they would be on cloud nine no matter how many people suffered at the hands of it. Yeah, that's the part of it that I really, yeah, I mean, obviously the speech in its entirety, anytime I hear Trump speak, especially on this one, it isn't even a good speech. I don't have anything good to say. I'm not really even defending him. I'm pissed that his political opposition continues to make his campaign stronger by playing into this shit, which is why, like we've said, it almost feels like they're either A, desiring this outcome, or B, complicit in this outcome.
I don't know. Personally, I guess I'm kind of weird. I like Trump speeches. I think they're fun. Not like not in a like, oh yeah, this is great. Like this is the future I want for America, but more like, I can't believe this is happening. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's sort of it takes you out of reality, almost like watching a show on, some Netflix reality show where it's just like, oh, this is so obviously for entertainment. Surely I can just remove my brain from what's really happening. But then I have this harrowing realization at the tail end of it that this man not only was president at a time, but it may be again. Yeah.
Yeah. But see, for me, this speech was like, I was listening to it at work, and I kind of tuned it out at a certain point, because it's like, yeah, I've heard all this before. Yeah, I've heard similar sentiments before. It was kind of low energy too for me. Like normally he's like calling someone like a fat cow, or he's like making fun of someone's disability, or he's doing any other random terrible thing. So, I don't know. I was like, eh. So maybe that's why a lot of the media was scraping the bottom of the barrel, so desperate, like frothing at the mouth to try and find something to clip out of context. Which, by the way, here's a hot take. If you're a liberal who supported spreading this narrative, you're a white supremacist. I know that's a wild take, but hear me out, okay? So the reason I say that is because one in particular journalist circulated an image. I had talked to you about this before the show, of Trump saying, if you don't elect me, there will be a bloodbath. Then the camera cuts to Nazis screaming, Jews will not replace us. Then it cuts to a montage of far-right extremism. So what this does, in my opinion, is it invalidates these actual things that are happening. It makes it look like hyperbole. And anytime you now say, hey, this shit is a pipeline, this is Nazi adjacent, or these are Nazi talking points, or this is like white nationalism, and we need to be very careful of the way that these things are structured, or how that's working its way into like political annals, or whatever the case may be, right? Now it lends credence to someone rolling their eyes and going, oh, well, liberals just say everything is racist, everything is xenophobic, everything is this, everything is that. So by liberals championing this and being like, yeah, that's right, and they're circulating these articles, these videos, whatever, they're doing infinitely more harm. And I would argue actually running, defense or running interference for real white supremacy.
Yeah,
I know that's a bit of a tangent and probably came out of left field. It just came to me now. It's not like I had this written down in my notes, but it just kind of like occurred to me. This is what it is.
Yeah, I have actually thought privately. I don't know if we've discussed it as much in the time that we've known each other, but I really do think that they are sort of watering down what it means to be like a white supremacist and a Nazi. And I think, if anything, liberal media has only emboldened that position. So when I say things like they're strengthening Trump's position, they're also strengthening the things that his followers, his fucking cult, actually espouses and believes in. The that I see on Twitter all the time, that is what you're emboldening. You're making people want to be that. Even if they didn't actually want to be that before, they actually seem like they want to be it more now. Since the liberal attacks on Trump in the media. And again, this dumb motherfucker doesn't need you to invent new ways to attack him. This is the thing I can't wrap my head around, is why in any universe do you need to invent controversy from a man who walks it up to your table and feeds it to you?
True.
He literally brings it to you. He should have never, even touched politics. This man is not even anywhere near the sphere of being politically relevant or politically intelligent. I won't say that he's an unintelligent person, because I think he does have some things that he's good at, obviously. I think if you're going to get elected president, you have to be good with rhetoric, you have to have decent social intelligence, or at least he knows how to play his audience. But
Trump's really good at reading a room.
He's really good at reading a room, but I honestly, like, the fact that that was enough means that I think that they put him in that seat. I honestly think that because he became a freaking messiah to these people. He became this martyr, and liberal media loves making a martyr out of Donald Trump, even though they keep saying, oh, that's not what we're doing, we're just trying to highlight his true nature. They already know his true nature. He told you his true nature. It's just because he lies about facts or doesn't even present them in the first place doesn't mean that he's not telling you who he is. So the fact that you're using this as evidence to your point, when all it does is galvanize his voter base, shut the f*** up about it. Shut the f*** up. You are only making him more powerful. I swear to God, this man should have been laughed out of a room years ago, and he might be president for the second time as he goes from court hearing to court hearing to court hearing to speech to court hearing, getting sued left and right. He's still going to be in the White House. And if that's the case, I am going to, my head's just going to spiral off, and I won't be surprised.
It only feeds your point, because every single lawsuit, every single indictment, every single critique of him, statistically, this is not me saying this is like, these are actual studies, or I guess like poll data, shows that he garners more and more support, because even people that originally weren't a Trump fan are going, wait a minute, I've actually in my lifetime never seen the judicial system, quote unquote, weaponized against one man in this way. Maybe he's onto something. And it opens the door. And the people that already believe this, they're more and more entrenched in this and bought into that personality cult. So at some point, don't get me wrong, all these people have to be held accountable. All these people need to be deprogrammed. But the media is responsible for pushing these people further and further right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at a tweet that I screenshotted. Now, granted, I don't think this person is an actual member of media, but it's just a screenshot from Twitter that I sent you earlier today. I don't know if you got a chance to look at it. I think you did. Of a post about Maryland Governor Wes Moore.
Oh, yes, I saw that.
Yeah, voters in this election are focused on the tangible issues, their cost of living, their housing, and their health care. And this rhetoric that Democrats are pushing of democracy's going to end. Oh my God, how many times have I heard the phrase, this may be your last election? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You actually want me to buy that? You're running with that at the forefront? Sorry. Anyway, not to spiral further, but
no, go for it. Let's talk about it.
This is a Maryland governor speaking to his own party, saying you guys are too focused on Trump fear-mongering. This was posted on Twitter with a response from what I only can assume is a liberal that says, every scrap of evidence derived from actual elections, as opposed to supposed random encounters with random people, indicates that Dems win when the stakes are perceived to be high, and lose when the stakes are perceived to be about marginal pocketbook gains.
This is why Democrats got shoved in lockers in high school, bro. Like, they're so arrogant and smarmy.
I mean, again, the knowledge that he's this awful, borderline authoritarian figure that has, malicious intent for certain things and will do harm to people. I know it sounds weird, but we already all know this. His voter base knows it and supports it because they're also malicious. And the other reason they support it is because out of the gate, this is the shit that liberal media was pushing. This was the forefront of our attention. And I haven't not heard about it every single day since 2016 when he announced his candidacy. I swear, there hasn't been a single day in the 24-hour news cycle that hasn't had some hit piece about this guy. And just because most of the shit you say is true doesn't mean you can't acknowledge and see. Democrats are supposedly the smart ones, liberals are supposedly the Ivy League educated ones, or whatever the they claim. You know that you're galvanizing his voter base. You know that you're igniting the exact support that you claim to be opposed to and appalled by. So what the are you doing?
Not only that,
and day out.
Not only that, if you think of it this way, like the 9-to-5 worker, the single mom who's like got a child and maybe pregnant with another but can't, doesn't have access to healthcare, the construction worker, the person in retail, like they're all struggling for a myriad of different reasons, and all they know is they're struggling to pay their bills, right? They don't give a I don't think on average that Trump is going to be a dictator. They give a that even though liberals constantly gaslight them about the economy's better, the CPI is up, everything's better. Your feelings. They just know that they're struggling and they're still hurting. We're still in a rubber band effect. We're not going to feel any positive changes for at least 2 years. And I don't know. I just think that the average person is worried more about putting food on the table and having adequate healthcare. So in case they get sick while working 70 hours a week, they don't drop dead, versus, oh yeah, Trump is going to totally, take the rest of your rights. Like, I don't think that even broaches most people's conversations on the daily, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna do a personal shout out. I'm not gonna, divulge too much information, but my father is one of those people that you described. He doesn't give a single solitary who sits in that goddamn chair. He cares about his day-to-day routine. How's my household? How's my family? How's my healthcare? How's my economy? How's that? Am I paying my bills? Am I paying them on time? Do I have money left over? Do I have food? Do I have shelter? This is what the average American cares about, mostly for some other reasons that we've alluded to in previous episodes and previous discussions.
Correct.
But this is the forefront of the focus. So constantly it becomes the same listless noise that we were using to describe the back half of Trump's speech. It just becomes this continuum of white noise.
It's easy for Trump to pick up followers too, because it's like, if I'm an average American and my life is ass, what the do I have to lose? Either one, Trump loses and it's politics as usual, my life continues to be ass, or I take a chance that Trump might be slightly better and my life is slightly less ass, or he is everything they said and my life stays ass. I don't know, man. Listen, I keep coming back to it. Like, it's the only logical conclusion. Democrats want to lose. Because I don't even think I'll be hyperbolic in this episode. I don't even think it's necessarily that they're just okay with it. I think they want to, because I don't know why else you would make every single possible poor decision unless it's on purpose. Yeah, they have think tanks, for Christ's sake. That's literally a think tank's job, is to spitball these things, workshop these ideas, basically play test phrases, buzzwords, look at trajectories, look at the economy, look at projections. That's their job. And if you have 100 people, all of which are highly intelligent and highly educated, and all have super hyper specific job fields, and they all come to the conclusion of, hey, do this dumbass thing, what the is going on?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's I've mentioned it to you recently. I know that you haven't watched it. Some folks in our audience may not have either, but there is a show that used to be obscenely popular called The West Wing, and that's literally what the whole show was about.
My mom loves that show.
Yeah, it was a huge hit. I mean, one of HBO's biggest shows of all time, but it came out and was, mostly popular in the 90s, and then I think it ended either late 90s or early 2000s. But anyway, the show follows the president and his chief of staff in this room of think tanks and writers that all have these insane CVs, these Ivy League degrees. There's the top 0.01% of intellect in the United States, and they spend tireless hours pumping themselves full of caffeine, sleeping 3 hours a night. They're working 24/7 to write speeches that are perfectly and carefully calculated and worded, inspiring, but not damaging, not adversarial, more of an ally, whatever it was. And people are going to have their opinions on the show and how it depicts American politics, but you have to feel like, at least from the staffer's perspective, that was a pretty good insight. And there's been feedback on the show that that's pretty good insight to some semblance of reality. So how the do we go from that to what we have now? I'm starting to, I'm on the ledge of intentional versus complicit, so it's not going to take much more for me to be pushed all the way off the cliff there. Because the reason, again, let me just, back up a little bit. I'm not suggesting that Republicans are this great defensible party. I've said it many times. I think most of them are demons or goblins or whatever term you want to use. But Democrats are supposed to be the ones that are, quote, saving the world with democracy, and we're the better solution, and we're the civilized party. We're the ones that believe in love and happiness and prosperity for everybody and equal rights and yada yada yada. And they're writing bullshit speeches to put somebody like Donald Trump back in the White House.
Well, you already know my stance on Democrats. I have a very low opinion of institutional Democrats and liberals.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And anyone that does any modicum of research on that would probably come to the same conclusion. But the reason that I'm harping on them so much right now is because I feel like they're actually doing more to elect Donald Trump than Donald Trump is.
Yeah. But then again,
right.
when you look at campaign ads and you see that you have prominent members of the Senate on either side paying for the opposition's, attack campaigns, something's not gelling here.
As my favorite comedian and one of my favorite celebrities ever to have said, George Carlin, he said, "It's a big club and you ain't in it."
True.
And he was referring to politicians and capitalists and business owners, the 1%, which includes politicians, and us. It's an us versus them mentality. It always has been. And unless we start doing something about it and understanding how to actually change the system and reform it to the needs of the people, it will continue to be.
And no, before anyone in the audience says some dumb we're not socialists either.
No, that. No. No. I'm talking about tangible, modernized, adaptive situations because it's 2024 and I don't want people to constantly try to tell me what ism I am when it comes to political thought. Super based.
That's the whole point of the experiment we're doing.
But anyway.
And in case this is your first time tuning in, one of the things that makes our show unique, we don't tell our audience what our political alignments are. But everyone, make no mistake, everyone can get the smoke.
Oh yeah, I've got plenty enough for everybody. I've started off light so far, so
yeah.
There's plenty more to come in terms of smoke. But we did have a few other topics that we wanted to talk about. Is there a particular spot you wanted to go to next?
Actually, yes. Why don't we discuss the Boeing Whistleblower? For anyone that doesn't know, there was a gentleman named John Barnett, I believe it was.
Yeah, John Barnett.
He filed a civil suit against Boeing. I guess he had. It was alleging that Boeing had taken part in years of criminality and abuse of workers. This man recently was found deceased. So it gets really interesting. So I'm going to say this for the sake of terms and conditions across the different platforms we're on, and for the sake of legality, we're not necessarily espousing anything conspiratorial, but we are going to lay out the facts as they've developed, and we're going to let you, the audience, come to your own conclusion. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I don't want to be misconstrued as stating anything as a matter of fact other than the facts that are already known and are widely available to the public. All
right, so did you have any information on the 32-page complaint that was issued publicly? I will link it in the description of this video on YouTube.
I didn't get any specifics from the actual cited 32-page complaint. So I think we should start there, and then a lot of the details and information I have pertain, frankly, to the history of his filings, like back in 2017, his whistleblower complaint that he filed, and
Gotcha.
Just some timeline on that, and then leading up to recently and the current police investigation around it.
So with his time, he did 7 years at Boeing, South Carolina, right? In North Charleston. What timeline was that?
So he moved to the Charleston plant. I believe it was I want to say it was 2014. I'll double check on that real quick just to make sure. But I believe that is when he moved, because he originally worked in the Everett manufacturing plant in Washington State, and then moved to that area. I believe I can't remember if it was 2014 or 2016 that he moved to that plant. I will double check that shortly.
Either way, he had alleged numerous ethics complaints, correct? And
yes.
I think one of the things that was said was, quote, Boeing it was deeply rooted in a persistent culture of concealment. And I believe he had also made mention of him and his other workers were pressured by Boeing upper management to violate Federal Aviation Administration, which is the FAA standards and regulations, which is a felony.
Yeah, so...
I don't want to get too far ahead, but...
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. For some reason, I'm not able to find the pinpointed year that he moved to that plant, but the timeline of events that I have is that from the experience that he had in the North Charleston, South Carolina plant, he had filed a litany of complaints with management, to which he said that the response was to, squash any and all dissent, any and all concerns that had been raised about quality assurance, which was his primary role. He was a quality control manager at Boeing. So his entire job is to make sure that safety regulations are a priority and are being followed to the law and to company standards, both of which were not happening, as we just said previously. In 2017, he filed a whistleblower complaint against Boeing early on in the year. And then after hearing his case, in the midst of the conflict, he had even made headlines then in 2019 when he and other former employees actually spoke to the New York Times, in which at the time was a huge deal, in which they had, in his words, yet to produce a plane that I'd put my name on saying it's safe and airworthy according to regulations and to the law. From that, he cited that he then went into years of suffering from severe panic attacks and was even diagnosed with PTSD from the information that I'm reading here. He accused the company of adopting a culture that prioritized raw numbers and profits over quality, and the subsequent backlash that he received and harassment that he received after his interview in 2019 and after the whistleblower complaint was filed, actually, in his words, haunted him up until his last days.
Yeah. So from my understanding, the forms of harassment that he would receive is they would like constantly give him poor marks. They would isolate him from the rest of his work group. They would constantly move him around the plant so he didn't have a stable work environment. I guess one of the things that was also a big deal that he had alleged was, by the way, one of the places he was stationed, just putting it out there, it was one of the facilities where the Boeing 787 Dreamliner was assembled. Just putting that out there. I mean, that should be like a huge red flag for people, but
yeah.
One of the things. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, that was the Dreamliner seemed to be the focal point of a lot of his documented complaints and issues that he brought up.
Yeah. One of the things that was mentioned was that he was instructed to not document remedies and defects on the 787, which resulted in an incomplete build record, which is also, coincidentally enough, a felony. So there's just like this laundry list of crimes that have been done and a crap ton of reprisal against this man and anyone that was trying to support him.
Yeah, and then, there are some things, sort of the timeline of the company that I'm going to go back to, but as far as the unfortunate end to the story that is John Barnett, was that recently he was found dead of what is currently being suggested, but it's just in the early ongoings of a police investigation. It is being referred to as a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, in the parking lot of the Holiday Inn that he was staying at during giving his testimony against Boeing.
Yes.
So he was in the midst of his testimony in which he was testifying against Boeing to the things that we have mentioned previously, and he was then found dead in the parking lot of the hotel he was staying at on the weekend within the week that he was giving that testimony.
Yeah, and what makes it super, super interesting, shall we say, maybe even suspect, is that this man, by every account, was really excited to tell his story. I guess there's a recording of him giving his testimony in court. He was rolling the Boeing attorney because he had memorized dates, times, the entire documents. He was like citing verbatim information from a 10-year-old document, which is pretty cool. And his own lawyer said, watching him in action, in his mind, he said that was the best witness he had ever in his entire career seen. This dude had given several hours worth of testimony. He was set to go home. He had packed all of his shit, okay? Then the Boeing lawyers took a position where they could not move forward in the trial unless he were to stay one more day and finish, I don't know if it was like a deposition report or more testimony or what have you. But he agreed to stay one more night, and he was found dead the following morning. Very interesting.
Yeah, especially when, to kind of piggyback on the comments of his legal counsel, there's also an interview that his brother did, John Barnett's brother did, in which he stated that in talking to his brother leading up to him leaving to go to give his testimony before traveling, that his brother was, quote, in very good spirits and really looked forward to putting this phase of his life behind him.
Yes.
So
what's also interesting is that he had, I don't know if, did you see the interview or read about the interview of the friend that came out?
Yes.
The confidant that said that he told her in no uncertain terms, if I'm found dead, specifically of suicide, it's because I was murdered. I guess Boeing's not necessarily official position, but it seems to be the position they're straddling, is that this man was a mentally disturbed, depressed, and difficult worker. So it's a lamentable, tragic thing, but this is what's to be expected. It seems like that's going to be their position, because it's kind of like what they're alluding to.
Yeah,
but by every account, that's bull.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of fanning of the, I mentioned earlier that he had stated in an interview with, I think it was Ralph Nader in 2019, the same year of the New York Times interview that he did with his fellow employees, that, the process, the experience that he had gone through had taken a serious mental and emotional toll on him. It kept him up at night. That's where he sort of revealed that he was suffering from PTSD and anxiety attacks as a result of being subjected to a hostile work environment. And it seems like dissenters of the idea or notion that this may have been theoretically foul play, that is a specific detail that they are harping on and that they are magnifying.
I'm sorry, who's they?
Those in opposition of the theory that this was some malicious foul play committed by Boeing. Not saying that it's Boeing specifically that's making this stance or that they're the ones fanning this. I'm just talking about discourse amongst civilians outside of the purview of the actual case. Gotcha.
But of course, to be fair, there are things we do not know. There will be developments in the case, which I'm perfectly cool covering later on down the road if you are.
Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely want to follow this story.
I definitely found this to be interesting. Funny enough, I had not heard about this. You were actually the one that brought it to me.
Yeah.
So you kind of opened the door to a whole nother world for me here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a news story that, like, I don't know, maybe, again, I have maybe my own biases and cynicism, but it feels like a story that should be remembered regardless of the outcome of it, but is going to be talked about a lot less here within the next, month or two. It feels like something that's going to be. I hope I'm wrong. Again, I'm not saying that there's any validity to what I'm saying, or my suspicions, or my worries, my concerns. Is that this man's story is going to be forgotten about and washed away. We're in an election year in a 24-hour news cycle. But I think it's exceedingly important that the very idea that an experience with a company as prolific as Boeing led this man to his death, whether it be through malicious foul play or suicide or otherwise, whatever the actual outcome of the investigation is, it's extremely meaningful. And I think it's something that needs to be remembered, and it needs to be discussed, and it needs to be highlighted. The other reason why this particular story stuck out to me, and the reason I wanted to talk to you about it, is because, Boeing as a whole hasn't exactly had a great year. But the thing that's really bugging me about it, outside of just the implications of a company like Boeing having the issues that they're having currently, is that it's become a superhighway for racists to start discussing issues with DEI. Now, DEI is something that I plan to cover more in depth later, but the other reason that this is a nagging story on my conscience is because there are all of the wrong people taking the hit for Boeing planes falling out of the sky, parts missing, parts not, bolts not screwed on properly, all these engineering failures from what is supposedly one of the most well-reputed, most reputable American manufacturing companies of all time.
Hold on a second. Let me make this abundantly reductive for the audience. In case you aren't familiar with what he's referencing, a bunch of dumb racists online and in some political spaces, like in positions of power, are basically blaming minorities for the shoddy building and craftsmanship of some of these airplanes. They're saying DEI is basically giving dumb black people jobs that shouldn't have them. Dumb black people are building shitty airplanes, and good white people are dying because of it. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. Sometimes I get carried away on a train of thought, and I have to remember to catch myself and add clarification, so I appreciate you doing that for everybody. But there are people, and if this was just the occasional hopeless racist on social media, that would be one thing, but we're talking about people that have massive followings, and millions of people are waiting at the beck and call for what these people have to say and taking it as gospel, and they're using that platform to push this bullshit narrative that is just, like I said, it's just dumb racism, but I just can't let it go, because the history of Boeing, even dating back to the late 90s, is one that shows that all of the same problems, rather than being explained by non-white people having jobs at Boeing, could be explained by corporate greed, which I feel like is the problem and is the result most of the time, but instead racist pieces of shit have to find another reason to blame minorities for all the problems in the world, because capitalists would never do this to them.
Well, they don't get that far. They'll get right up to the edge. They'll understand there is a problem, but then they'll corner turn at the last second and be like, it must be the Jews, or it must be black people, or it's the Mexicans, or it's women. It's weird, dude.
Yeah, no, and if this wasn't a time in which there were so many people that weren't already dumb racists that are being dragged over and associated with these morons and their political commentary, if you want to even call it that, if it wasn't an era in which people were so quick to jump ship to some of these insane media personalities, maybe I'd let it go. Maybe I'd say, let dumb people espouse their dumb ideas, and, racists are going to be racist, so it's not like they're creating new harm or new hatred. No, they absolutely are. They absolutely are, and I don't want to be quiet about it. I don't want to just sit here and let it happen.
There is a solution to this. They could just say it.
Yeah, exactly. Just say it.
Just say the word. You want to say the word. Just say it.
Just say the word, and don't use the cop-out. Say the actual word, because I know that you get a freaking erection every time you say it. You have to. There's no way you don't.
Say it.
So, yeah. But when Boeing had the historic merger in 1996 with McDonnell Douglas, they immediately began pivoting to a profit-driven corporate ethos, that immediately had a tangible domino effect on the same issues that ended up to the discussion that we have today. And the fact that we're not talking about that history, the fact that I had to go to a comedian on on a media program, on a news program that's supposed to be entertaining to learn about it, is disgusting. Okay, the fact that there's all these people that want to talk about DEI being the problem when Boeing has turned into a two-headed snake since 1996. Are you shitting me? Like, there's videos from 2014 of undercover video of them interviewing people that were working on the same 787 Dreamliners, asking the Boeing employees if they would ever set foot on one of these planes. So many of them said no. So many of them said no. If you're working on a airplane that's carrying 300 people per flight, 288 to be precise, and the people making it and putting it together wouldn't set foot in it, how does that have anything to do with DEI hires? I just don't understand. And obviously they don't actually think that that's the case, or even if they do, those people. But to espouse it and put it into the ether for some people to be misguided through fear-mongering or whatever it is to believe that, no, I'm not okay with it. I'm not okay with it. And anyone who does even the remote... I watched a 10-15 minute video and did some article reading about the history of Boeing, which is pretty well documented. It's a giant-ass company that has major implications on our military-industrial complex. This should be more common information. This should be more commonly known. This shouldn't be so hard to find. And I'm tired of the poisoning of the discourse.
Yeah, I mean, I just learned something. I didn't know about that with the merger. So thank you.
Yeah.
Learn something new every day.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, even back there was articles that the Seattle Times was doing. They published one in 2019 that showed that Boeing was diverting 92% of its operating cash flow into stock buybacks and share dividends instead of reinvesting it into safety infrastructure, materials. They started heavily outsourcing all of their parts manufacturing, and they were doing like the crazy Manhattan Project stuff where they were having different people work on different parts and then basically gluing it all together at the end.
Yikes.
And for some reason that's black people's fault. I don't understand how this is anything other than just your cut and dry corporate greed story, and we're just scapegoating now, as we always are. But this one is particularly sinister in my opinion. Anyway, sorry. Like I said, tonight I feel like there's a different energy for me. I'm on one tonight on some of these topics.
True.
But
that's the real bloodbath is the 787s.
Yeah, exactly. That's my hill to die on, apparently. But
Yes.
Anyway, allegedly. And allegedly, of course, we're not saying anything is true. We're letting law enforcement do what law enforcement does. They do great work. But anyway, and then sort of getting off of that topic now, I think it's a good time, or as good a time as any, to kind of go into the last thing that we wanted to discuss, which
is our meat and potatoes tonight, I think.
Yeah, funny enough, I have the most information about this. I don't know if I'll rant quite as heavily, so I'm trying to dial it back a little bit. But
if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind. I want to tear the Band-Aid off for me first. I want to monologue about this briefly, and then I'm going to hand it over to you, if that's cool.
Well, let's do it. I mean, I think I just had my soapbox, so I think it's only fair to let you go first on this one.
All right, so we're discussing the TikTok ban, as it's called, quote unquote, the TikTok ban, and everything that the politicians have done thus far. So, to give the audience some context, you and I are on the opposite sides of this conversation.
Yep.
For the most part. So,
yep.
I did a lot of reading about this. Like, way too much. Like, way more than I should have. Like, I've read on and off all day about it, and I read a bunch in the middle of the night last night about it. And I'm so f***ing done with TikTok in general. I don't want to read about it anymore. I need a break. But I think that my stance from originally telling you, like, I'm all for it, f*** this thing, ban this shit. It's not that it's changed, but upon a ton of research, I think my position has slightly softened, and there's nuance as to a pivot that I want to make, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So, So I'm being upfront with my stance. I despise TikTok. I think it's not only bad for people in terms of information retention and presentation, but there's actually some studies being conducted currently about it's an attempt to link excessive short content stimulus to cognitive impairments such as things like dementia. So I think that that's potentially really damaging. I think TikTok is also way under moderated in terms of content and like what is being presented to people. That's why roughly 20% at any given content at all contains or promotes misinformation. I don't care personally. This is one of those, I think, maybe my ostrich moments. I don't personally care what anyone has to say to the contrary. I genuinely believe that it has a potential to be a national security threat, especially if we were to ever get into a conflict with China, like an actual like hot war, not a cold war. I think that there's numerous applications where it could be used against the population. One of those things would be TikTok's ability to pull not just like most companies actually. I'll make a concession immediately. Most companies monitor and pull more data. They mine more data than TikTok does. But what makes TikTok's data mining unique is that it's not just all aggregate, which means it doesn't just throw it all in an anonymous pool. It's hyper specific. So that can be really, really dangerous. Another thing, I absolutely believe TikTok to be part of the CCP's Digital Silk Road initiative, which is where they seek to spread influence over smaller, lesser developed countries or to strike out against larger, more developed countries that they might view as adversarial. The way that works is that they grant financial, political, and expansionatory aid to allies. Basically, with the goal to create or improve telecommunications networks. I think it was AI capabilities, cloud computing, e-commerce, mobile payment systems, all that shit. So to me, like at this time of recording, actually, when I looked this up last, it said that China had already provided more financial, information, and communications technologies than all multilateral agencies and leading democracies than the entire continent of Africa combined, which is nuts. That's like an insane amount of information that they have access to. And there's currently 138 countries that are all allied with China to take part in this Digital Silk Road initiative that they have going on. Obviously, I think that's a huge red flag. It's a huge problem down the road. If you don't believe me, Germany had purchased a bunch of 5G technology from China and a whole bunch of other higher networking communications, only to find out that all of them were internally built with vulnerabilities and backdoor snooping capabilities. And then NATO obviously banned TikTok, they banned a bunch of other Chinese owned hardware from certain, I guess, NATO bases. So that's very telling in my opinion. I hate TikTok. I'm perfectly fine with it being banned. The problem that we run into... Oh, wait, before I get into that. Let's not forget that the FBI was not that long ago investigating TikTok because its employees were allegedly accessing American journalists' personal data. So that should also be a huge red flag. Now, all of that out the door, where I have to take a step back and analyze the situation is the solution that I'm presented with. Okay, so me personally, even though I'm cool with the ban, what they actually created, because I read the bill, and I didn't just read this bill, which is called the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act. I read over Trump's executive order, which was, I think, 13942, which basically banned transactions between the TikTok app and American citizens. I read over the Consolidated Appropriations Act from 2022. I read over, it had like a subsection which was no TikTok. It was basically no TikTok app on government devices. It's the same thing as NATO did. I briefly glanced at the Data Act and the Restrict Act. Neither one of them passed and had no legislation that stemmed from them passed, but they were basically different forms of restriction. The issue that I personally have reached is if you're gonna ban it. But what they've done is they've actually kind of created an asset forfeiture and asset seizure act, because it doesn't actually ban TikTok. it says that TikTok will just be unavailable in the App Store until an American-owned company can access it or buy it. And I think that's horrendous. And you actually told me that you thought the national security example was bullshit, and you're right. It's bullshit. I have a bunch more to say, but I want to get you in on this too. Sorry, I don't mean to monologue, but like I had to say all that first.
Oh no, I I completely understand. Funny enough, this is a discussion that we interpersonally started to kind of kick up, and it really snowballed quickly, and we were like, hold on, let's give ourselves some time to do some research, and then we'll circle back to it, because we don't want to get too carried away and say all the things that we want to say and forget where we were. But the great thing, so I'm going to start out with the things that I agree with you on, because there are some. Even though we come to conclusions on the opposite side, I think it's interesting or good to highlight the similarities. The first and foremost, and probably the funniest one, is that I hate TikTok. I absolutely despise it as a platform. I think that it does actually elicit a number of legitimate concerns. I absolutely support the fact that it is not to be accessible on any phone that is government issued. I 100% support that. Countries across the world have the same ban. The only country that I could find that actually has or is trying to push, other than us, an explicit ban on the platform as a whole is India, and that was in response to actual military conflict that occurred between the two nations. So it was a direct response to that specifically. But other than that, most of Europe and even countries throughout the Middle East have a ban on any government phone, any phone used by a government official, to actually restrict TikTok from being available on it. I have 100% no problem with that whatsoever. The problem that I have is taking a platform that is so overwhelmingly popular with the American consumer, especially the youthful demographic. Even if I agree that there are things that would improve, especially for the youth, in terms of their, I know it sounds, and I apologize for anyone that immediately sounds like this is hypocritical of me to say, but I just want you to bear with me on this. I do agree that it is diminishing, to an undeniable extent, media literacy and political literacy. So by that statute alone, it seems like I would be 100% gung-ho for it. I'm really not, though. I'm really consistently against the government telling people that they cannot access a social media platform that is so obviously popular with their population. I mean, 170 million people in the US are using TikTok. That is actually half of the population. It's 50.8% of the US population is on TikTok, or at least has it downloaded on their devices. That's insane. That's an insane number of people. I'm not suggesting that TikTok is an inherent good, but I am suggesting that platforms in which people can share information with each other instantaneously has inherent value that I would strongly urge that we care more about how we moderate and protect the users than banning the app as a whole. As you said before, I've said this previously, and you now agree, or maybe you always agreed. I don't want to misrepresent your positions. The national security measure of it is it's felonious. It's completely asinine that is what they're leading with, because there's nothing to me that indicates that this is an actual national security concern. I don't think they give a about that whatsoever. I think they care about being in on the pie. I think they care about being able to monetize it. And to tell a company of any kind, regardless of their attachments to certain political parties, that they are going to be forced to sell their company or to divest their company, so that way U.S. interests and U.S. companies, or at least non-companies that are not attached to their government, their country's government, get to be financially invested in this globally popular app that makes billions of dollars. I think to me, it's just such an obvious and thinly veiled disguise to say that it's national security related, and I think it's entirely contingent on it being about money.
I genuinely do believe it's a national security. Well, not like a dyed-in-the-wool threat, but I do think the potentiality is there, and that's why I take issue with it. I also don't think where I hear a lot of whataboutism, like what about these other apps that are also like foreign owned that are, you know, harvesting data. I don't think that that's a good argument to make, because we're specifically talking about something that doesn't use aggregate polls unless you're a it does do aggregate data if you're a non-TikTok user, but like the fact that TikTok can access your contacts, access your social media, and find people that are in your contacts but also aren't on the platform and then pull them into an aggregate is really disturbing to me.
Yeah, no, and let me please clarify, because again, I want to clarify this to the best of my ability. I do think that there is a potentiality for it to be a national security threat. What I don't agree with is that is why they want to put this ban through.
Then I agree. I set out with every intention to die on this hill, opposed to you, but I've somehow kind of come around to meeting you in the middle here. Like, I'm still vehemently opposed to it. I still think it should be banned. Like, in my perfect world, it's banned. Or at least we have something that's, like, educational. Kind of like if you look at the China's version of TikTok, it's educational. It's not dumb shit where kids are dancing and stuff like that. It helps them with all sorts of different academic purposes. That's something I think that we need.
Yeah, so for me, I agree with you. I don't want to condemn something because it has a lot of entertainment value, but there was some interesting things. So ultimately what my position's going to circle around to is that I want the app to exist, and I want it to be heavily transparent with what it does to its users, and I want that to be required information for people who download the app and open it. And I also want it to be clear that there are strides being made to actually protect user data. The reason that I agree with you that it's a bad faith argument to compare it to other social media applications of its kind is because I think when we were talking about it in person, I had mentioned the fact that like companies like Tencent own a significant chunk of Reddit, which is another massive, globally expansive social media site. The problem is there's a huge difference between a Chinese company owning 10% of a company or having a 10% share and wholly and solely owning it. So exactly. I concede and agree with the fact that alone elicits a much greater risk to national security. That being said, there has been information that has come out that a large percentage of the youth that uses the platform actually uses it to get their news about the world around them.
That's cool. But that, again, if you have a bunch of misinformation being pumped through, which, to be fair, every social media has that problem. Yeah. It's still, but if you have predominantly young people using it, I do think that that's concerning.
No, it is. That's why I'm saying that because this is a way, this can be leveraged. Its network can be leveraged to be a force for good. So that's why I say rather than banning it, if you don't let people get a cut of the financial side of it, actually be invested in how the platform is run and operated. So what I would suggest is pressing the CEO on the statements that he recently made after he recently testified in front of Congress, in which the U.S. government, I think, again, kind of played into my cynicism of whether or not they really care about this stuff when they kept making ridiculous statements and accusations that he was a member of the Chinese Communist Party when he's a Singaporean national. But I'm not going to...
It's kind of racist, but go on.
Yeah, kind of blatantly racist, but I'm not going to divert too much into that because I don't think it's really central to the point. But anyway... because so much of the youth is using this platform to get information, we need to make sure that they understand what information from them and what it tangibly means is being done to them when they use the app, and what steps are being taken to protect them. The step that the CEO alluded to is that the company has, I'm sure you're aware of this because you just said you did a bunch of reading about it, they call it Project Texas,
Yes,
which
Oracle.
which has been lukewarm at best at holding to its promise. The recent development, from what I read, was the potential Oracle partnership, that they were going to revamp the program in the midst of the testifying in front of Congress. That he would have to then come back with a plan to the U.S. government as to how this was actually going to fulfill the promise that it was originally intended to when they introduced it back in 2022. If they don't fulfill this promise, you have a completely different set of conversations. I understand the cynicism. I'm not saying that this company needs to be considered inherently trustworthy. I'm not trying to say anything good about the platform inherently, because as I said at the very beginning, I don't even like the platform. I don't like the app. I don't like the platform. I don't like the CCP, etc., etc. But when you have an overwhelming amount of your youth using it for, like, they did a study, there was a study that I read up on last night that was done in Australia that showed that the app actually gave, now granted, we're talking about differences between Australian culture and Australian literacy versus the US, so I understand that there's a caveat here, but they said that it actually had a number of surprising positive impacts on the way that these youths felt and thought. And it wasn't just thinking in general, it was thinking about the world around them. They said that there was a lot of information that came out. A lot of people studied, a lot of the teenagers studied in Australia, said that it helped them emotionally through the COVID-19 pandemic. It helped give them a sense of interconnectedness with people around them. This is one of the benefits of social media. TikTok being overwhelmingly slanted towards like short burst entertainment, kind of, comedy, I guess, so to speak. So there's that. And then there was actually this one I did not expect. In this particular group, so again, I know there's a lot of people we're talking about here, so this can't necessarily be said for all of them, but it actually gave these teenagers better insight into their position in the world and opened their minds to perspectives outside of their own that they said, or they claimed, they wouldn't have otherwise if it wasn't for having access to global input through this app.
Okay, so sorry, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Because I do want to, there's layers to this conversation.
There is. I think there is more that I wanted to say on top of that, but I think we'll get to it through the continuation.
I think we're both chomping at the bit to talk about this because we've done so much research. Like it has to mean something. So I get 50% roughly of Americans use it. 50% of Americans also support the TikTok ban, roughly. So we're pretty evenly divided as a country on this. I'm not worried. Now, this is going to sound like I'm a hypocrite, but bear with me. I'm not worried about what 170 million people believe or think that they want if they're not fully understanding what's going on the back end. That doesn't mean that I think people are necessarily stupid, even though I do think that sometimes. And sometimes people act against their best interests. I think TikTok is used as escapism. If we go back to that study that you just brought up, it's a total double-edged sword, because I think it's great that it was able to help them with their emotions and it influenced their position and insight on the world. But you could easily flip that on its head and use it as an arm of propaganda, or you could use it as a psychological operations tool. And you could either make people, I don't know, unstable, you could make them fearful, you can do all sorts of counter initiatives against the United States government, you could open people up to like communist sympathies. Like it goes on and on and on and on. Obviously that's kind of conspiratorial, but I'm just saying these things have happened in the past, in history, they can happen again. So to me, obviously, that's infinite good that it did do. I still think that there's infinite bad it can do. I just don't like to take that chance. I did want to ask you about if you were aware of the investment groups that were getting involved, because I think that that's what I mean by like there's other layers to this. And that's kind of like where I actually started to turn to more meet you in the middle with this, was when I started understanding who Steve Mnuchin is and like all these different investment groups that were getting involved. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay. So it's tied to the Oracle. Oracle's a defense contractor, by the way, for anyone in the audience. But I'm sorry, I didn't. If there's more you want to add to it, we can segue into the investment groups and stuff.
I have a few counters. I don't know if they're really counters specifically. I don't need to say them necessarily right now.
No, go for it. I want to hear your position. I want to hear what you think.
The only other thing that I wanted to say, and I know that you already mentioned this, so I'm not going to harp on it too much, because you mentioned things about, sort of whataboutisms and things like that. My whataboutism would not necessarily be about it being owned by Chinese companies or anything, because I've already conceded. We both agree that TikTok's ownership and relationship with the CCP does present a unique threat to national security, since that's the reasoning that they're giving. Mm-hmm. The only thing that I'm going to whataboutism on is it being a danger to permeate negative political thought, or it's an opportunity to leverage negative political thought and to galvanize its user base, because I have never seen a platform do the harm to political discourse like the world's largest social media platform does currently.
Facebook?
And Facebook or X. Honestly, I was referring to X, but especially under current ownership and current leadership, like you and I both, you see my feed every day because I go out.
You show it to me.
Yeah, whether you want to see it or not, sometimes I feel like exactly. I have to share it because I can't always believe what I'm seeing. So, and I'm not necessarily, because like this isn't something that you and I have gone back and forth on a lot, but I've gone back and forth with a lot of other people about TikTok about this. In my mind, there is really nothing tangible that has been proven or shown that suggests that TikTok is more dangerous to political thought than Twitter is currently. And so when I think of why one is being heavily targeted by the US government to be potentially banned and the other one isn't, I start to think maybe the reasons aren't as altruistic as people want to believe. Now, again, you didn't say that you believe it's altruism, so I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm just talking about this is an argument that I've heard that really sets me off, because I think Twitter is actual brain rot on an entire platform, and while TikTok may also be brain rot, that means that they're of equal value, but we're not having an equal conversation about them. Right. And then the last piece that I wanted to add, this one might lose some people because it was years ago, but I can't believe it wouldn't be still important for the sake of the argument. When we talk about foreign entities causing harm in our federal elections, our national elections. Well, if people remember, I'm sure most people do, there was an entire company that was hoarded out by different US politicians during the 2016 election that pumped misinformation all throughout social media platforms that were US based and US owned, primarily Facebook and YouTube, mostly Facebook. This was a UK based company. Talk about Cambridge Analytica. This is a company that has nothing to do with an adversarial nation. So to me, there's opportunity teaming as long as the dollar sign is large enough. There's tampering in federal elections and poisoning of political discourse as long as your pocketbook is deep enough. I'm not saying that the CCP wouldn't also do these things, but I think it's interesting that we're holding China to a bit of a different standard than we're holding to companies that are literally our allies. The private sector is doing as much harm, if not more harm in a lot of ways, than this entire nation is. That was just kind of the last observation I had. I know it's a little off the rails, but I think it's important if we're going to talk about having a fair and level discussion about who's causing harm where. That's another reason that, to me, the whole thing seems a little suspect.
It is suspect, I would agree. And I would agree that everyone should be held accountable across the board for this stuff. This is all make no mistake. If I'm not going to take chances with an enemy, I'm sure not going to take chances with a friend.
Yeah.
So I agree with you.
I also don't want Cambridge Analytica to escape, because I know they changed their company name, and they're operating again outside of that. And I think that they should never, ever, ever be forgotten. And their name needs to continuously be brought up for the bullshit that they pulled and the bullshit that your politicians fed to them in order to do this. Want people to remember.
What did they pump out?
So the company during the 2016 election, Hillary versus Trump, they were found overwhelmingly guilty of taking donations, taking money from United States political pundits and from private companies in the US, political interest groups, to seed disinformation, to spread misinformation across United States social media platforms, most primarily YouTube and Facebook. The whole thing that people talk about when they try to trace what started this sort of like fear-mongering, sensationalist media presence surrounding political discussions in this country, it's not that they were the first to do it, but this is when things started to take a turn for the worst. And I think it was literally the beginning of how we got to where we are today in the current state of social media poisoning political discourse and media literacy. A lot of this can be attributed to this company. And this company is a UK-based company. There's documentaries out now that detail all the horrific things that they have done and that Facebook has done to poison the well of the youth specifically, and to manipulate our emotional states to not understand what's happening to us and to make us irrational voters. So I just want it to be clear that if we're going to be pointing fingers at people who are poisoning political discourse, people who are, ruining the minds of the youth, I want to start there.
So they changed their name to Emmer Data, it looks like?
Yep.
So I would have to do more research on Cambridge Analytica. I don't know enough about them to have an opinion, but I will take you at your word for now.
I'll send you information so that way people don't think I'm just making it up. But
no, that's cool. Interesting.
But as you were saying about the investment piece.
Yeah, so this is where I was still going, balls to the wall, it's better to not take the risk. And then when I realized there was this individual named Steve Mnuchin, and I guess a lot of people know him as the 2008 when we had that fallout, the recession. He's like the recession king or something like that. Like he's a pretty scummy dude. And this guy actually lobbied the House to pass this specific bill, which is a huge red flag in my mind, because this motherfucker came out immediately, like within hours of the verdict, saying that he's assembling an investor group to purchase this so that because it's the American right to own the company. So my mind goes, we've got too many fingers in the pies. We've already shifted the argument from national security, which I already told you. I told you in person. If the argument becomes not national security, I'll agree with you. And if they don't specify specifically that it's just TikTok, I would agree with you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So Section B of this bill, this new bill that they passed and Biden signed, it specifically does not pin down only TikTok. It opens it up for multiples of things. Any potential foreign country that can be seen as adversarial, that has X amount of ownership, is open for this asset forfeiture. That's insane. That's crony capitalism by every single definition. When I see this fucking guy come out, say all this shit, and then it has been alleged, I'm going to say that word, we've been using it a lot tonight, but alleged that a lot of the money that this guy has that's being funneled into his investment group is Saudi in nature and also from Mossad. Like Mossad agents are allegedly contributing funds to this. We don't know if money has already exchanged hands. We don't know how much money, but that's wildly concerning. And then if they have a partnership with Oracle, which is a defense contractor, and also, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know, Google is also listed as a defense contractor, which is insane for data. But to me, it's too much too soon, and it all seems really, really convenient. It's either, you can't say that this is a national defense concern, but then be like, we're actually just mad that we don't own it. So we're going to own it, and we're going to use the same technology that we're worried about is spying on Americans, and then we're going to spy on Americans. What? That makes no sense to me. So, like I said, if they have a ban on TikTok, I would support it. But it has to be, I think there should be a requirement that says this is only specifically for TikTok, and it is hyper specific to a national security concern. Another thing that I guess kind of was the final nail in the coffin for me in terms of, I would not quite say a full concession, but like meeting you in the middle and kind of being like, yeah, like, I'm glad I did the research, is that let's not forget that that Congress has ruled that businesses are people. And if you're going to rule that corporations and businesses have rights, you can't find someone guilty of something when there's nothing that they've technically done wrong. We're discussing potentials. We're discussing speculation. We're discussing trajectory. We're not discussing crimes that have been committed. So what you're actually doing is kind of a kangaroo court. You've said this person's guilty or this corporation's guilty, even though we have no evidence to fully support the claim. And instead, we're just going to use a political structure to force this outcome, which is insane.
Yep, I'm just going to start by saying that this is why these kind of dialogues, that kind of monologue is why I wanted to do this with you, because it was seeing somebody that would go and do the work and then have a really well-rationed and well-thought-out point, but we can still be on opposite ends of it, even though now we're kind of slowly creeping together in the middle somewhere. But just everything that you just said was what I was assuming or was cynical would be the case. And I don't want to be accused of like gloating, because nothing's actually happened yet. Nothing's happened. This is all, like you said, hypothetical. I don't want to say that I'm vindicated, because again, nothing's concrete, but this is exactly the type of concern that I was raising when we started this conversation. I just maybe didn't know the best words to put together or the best excuses or reasons why. But I didn't know about the Mnuchin thing, but this is just, it's like a home run for what my brain just had looming in the darkness. He is the exact opposite of the kind of person that you want in control. Just because the CCP is terrible and awful doesn't mean handing it over to an investment group of US companies, defense contractors, and specifically Mnuchin is a better outcome for anybody, especially American citizens. This guy, like you said, was quintessential to the problems that we had, the economic collapse that we had. And
yeah, he was called the economic collapse king.
Yeah, that's who you want being at the head of TikTok ownership or being a part of TikTok ownership. I mean, seriously, this is...
Also, just to clarify, all the investors, when he was asked to specifically open up the information to see like who are these groups of people adding money to this, he refused. So all of the investors currently, as of the time of this recording, are anonymous. All we know is that he's their representative.
Yeah, the fact that they're essentially, as I was kind of, like I said, I was concerned about this, the real reason that it feels to me like this is being brought up and why they're moving so quickly is because they want to be the ones spying on American citizens, and they want to be profiting off of it, which they've been doing. The American government has been complicit in the siphoning off of user data from US-based social media platforms since their beginning, since their origin. So the fact that we're going to now suddenly try and flip the script and you're going to convince me as the government that you're concerned about me, you're concerned about my data and my privacy and my security, off. You're talking to the wrong person. You might convince these 18 to 24-year-olds that don't know any better, but not me. I've seen this long enough. I've seen it played out long enough. I've read enough horror stories. I went through the whole 2016 thing. I'm not going to go back into Cambridge Analytica, but again, I'm just mentioning the name. I've seen it enough to know what it looks like, and the second that they announced that they were going after TikTok, that is exactly what went to my head was, oh, okay, I get it. So what you're saying is you're upset that China is at the helm of this when really it's a power play of you versus them over who gets to control the data and information and manipulate the minds of American citizens. You're just mad that China's doing it, not that you're doing it or that private interest is doing it.
Yeah. But again, just to clarify, don't buy into how it's sold. It's not an actual ban at all. It's just an asset forfeiture Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. Even more, I think it just lends more credibility to the criticism and the cynicism of it. They're not even actually going to ban the thing. They're just going to make it unavailable in the App Store. They don't have the capability of uninstalling it from your devices, as far as I'm aware.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, once it passes, they legally can't tell you to uninstall it, but you just can't install it.
Right. So,
which is weird.
Yeah, right?
Like, that defeats the point of a ban, especially since all these other countries like India, when they did have like temporary bans, and they had like, obviously the government doesn't use it on their devices, but they did have a temporary like ban. These motherfuckers within 5 minutes found a workaround. So it's not like I didn't know American citizens wouldn't do the same thing. Like, for Christ's sake, we have people that torrent. We have people that like use VPNs. We have people that pierce firewalls and like, it's easily done. The problem was, for me, it was like, if this thing is that big a risk, ostensibly, why take the risk? However, I guess I'm mad because it's like, I agree with the premise. It's just, that's not what actually is occurring. So when I spend hours of my time reading this, reading multiple bills, trying to pinpoint the specificity of whether or not it's just this app, and then it's a giant bait and switch, go yourself.
Yep, exactly. I mean, it's just the whole national security thing. It's just a giant red herring. I mean, for all I know, this could become the next Pegasus project. I have no idea. By the way, I'll give some source material on that for anyone that doesn't know what that means, but it's essentially a spyware project that was revealed and is awful, and the US has some hands in it, but I'll go into more detail on that a little bit later. But it just blows my mind that they continue to try and sell this when I know exactly what it is, and I feel like enough other people do too. But apparently that's me being completely ridiculous and out of touch, because like you said, 50% of people support it, and I think a lot of that percentage, the reason I'm so upset and cynical about it is because I feel like a big portion of that 50% were people like you that were like, oh, well, I totally agree with the premise. I agree with the end result. I'm totally complicit and happy with this thing no longer being in existence because it has the potential or currently does a lot of harm to specific things. But then you find out the motivations, and you find out you peel back one curtain and find a completely ulterior motive that has nothing to do with your interest at heart. It completely bastardizes the entire point.
And to be clear, and this is going to sound wild as but hear me out. To be clear, when you brought this up to me as like a topic of conversation, I hadn't done any research on it. Like, it really was in the background. Like, I'm worried about other right, obviously. And here's the wildest part of all of it. Of everything that I've read outside of the no having TikTok on government devices, the second most based act actually was Trump's, where he said you can use this, but we're not gonna like help give China more money. We're gonna ban the actual application component where it can be monetized. That's cool. I'm sorry, that's based. I don't want to give China any more money than we absolutely have to.
Yep,
that's a sidebar. That's a side tangential.
Yeah, like I said, I think that there are a multitude of options that would have been better. Threatening a ban in case they didn't want to cut you in on it is quite literally the worst possible approach that could have been taken if the motive was what they claimed it was. Sorry, go ahead. That's kind of been my whole stance on the argument, was they chose the worst possible approach. Unless, of course, people just didn't look any further and didn't find that there was ulterior motives. And it just feels like it was the most disingenuous, the most greedy, and the least likable version of what they could have done but it's exactly what I expected them to do.
Well, if you go back to the like origin point of all this before it shattered out and became what it is, what I guess the government had done was it requisitioned the framework for the algorithm because they wanted to see does it have these capabilities. And ByteDance said go f*** yourself, because the CCP told them specifically do not give them that, which is not a good look, especially if you're a quote unquote like trying to foster international diplomacy. You have a nation that's concerned about this. You have multiple other nations who have already said, especially Germany, that's like, yeah, this is be careful. And then, so now, their response to China saying no was to say, well, we'll ban it if you do. And China's basically like, China had a rebuttal to that, which was basically like, oh, well, we'll pull funding from a bunch of your companies, and we're also going to like remove TikTok entirely, the American version, from the store, from our app store or whatever. Like, who gives a So for me, following, again, surface level, because you and I definitely do deep dives on sometimes different things, but that's why we work so well together. When I go deeper into this and I see that this is, like I said, a bait and switch. Yeah, I like, as a normal, rational human being, if you took that 50% of the population that supports the ostensive ban of something that is deemed as a national security threat, and you're like, actually, it's a Ponzi scheme, I guarantee like 90% of people, if not more, would be like, no, this. The only people that would support that are psychotic, like, what is it, arco-capitalist psychopaths or libertarian psychopaths that are basically like, oh yeah, only the strong survive. Hyper-capitalism, let's go. Like, those are the only people in the world that would support something like that.
Absolutely. And I think the last point that I want to make is from a political strategy perspective. And some people may disagree with me on this, or they may say that I'm overplaying its importance, but I don't care. I'm going to say it anyway because I believe in it. This is, especially once this information becomes more known, and it will, primarily probably through the app they're trying to ban, the amount of distrust that it's going to further seed within young people in this country is going to continue to do so much harm for politicians.
Right.
Now, granted, from certain perspectives, and maybe down the road, if we want to go through this hypothetical, in some ways, that may be a good thing for progress, because it means people are going to understand that they can't trust these entities, these goblins on their television screens. But from a political strategy standpoint, this is the worst thing I could have possibly thought of. The overwhelming majority of TikTok users are within the ages 18 to 24. That is by far the most well-represented group of user base. And for you to go after something that they unilaterally accept and use, for better or for worse, regardless of anything else, was a bad idea to start, let alone once they find out that you did it so you could fucking fill your own pockets. I mean, so honestly, again, going back to people sitting in think tanks and thinking of this shit, did nobody really have this idea? No, I guarantee you that they did, and I guarantee you that they jumped over it and said, f*** them, we don't care. We want to do this because we want to make money.
And just to be clear, when I say that this bill passed, this isn't just for once Republicans being the antagonist and Democrats doing the bare minimum to be like, oh, we're not villains either, but actually we are. They both did it. There is no, like, one group that gets to play virtue signal or whatever. They're both guilty of this. They both sides were lobbied, both sides conceded, both sides passed it. Biden signed it.
Yeah, it's really nice seeing a Congress that can't do all in the entire year of 2023 unanimously come together to say, oh, but the one thing that we all know that we agree on is that this TikTok has got to go through.
While the bill passed the House, 352 people voted for it. Only 65 voted against it.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I know that there was some initial knee-jerk reaction from some political commentators that said, like, oh, when is the last time that Congress ever agreed on to this extent on anything. It's a little bit disingenuous, but it's not totally. I mean, obviously they agree on a lot of things, like making shiny commemorative coins for the United States Marine Corps. But the things that they all seem to unilaterally agree upon is bullshit like this. So again, it just continues to plant and grow the seeds of distrust and disdain for these people. They don't represent your needs. They don't represent your wants or your desires. They put out thinly veiled concerns to get you emotionally attached. They pull on the heartstrings and appeal to your humanity, and then they rob you blind on the back end. Everything seems to have an ulterior motive.
Something to dial in on. One huge takeaway from this, which is a sidebar, but still applies. This stuff like this is why we are having these conversations. Stuff like this is why we want to foster a culture of teamwork, bipartisanship, understanding, and education, media literacy, whatever you want to call it. And for people like us who agree on a lot of stuff, we can be reasoned to meet in the middle. For us to have these conversations, we want to kind of set the example. Because again, at the beginning, we were completely opposed. And now we're both hand in hand saying,
yeah, I mean, to me, if, like, I'm not going to say that it was my primary objective, and it's not the way that I would phrase it, but if I could get more people to arm themselves with the information that more people need to link arms and understand that there seems to be an adversarial relationship between our citizens and our current government and the paradigm in which we are governed, that's the only way that we're going to actually understand how to fix it. The first step is admitting there's a problem. The second step is identifying the source of those problems and the specificity of those problems. This is a part of that process.
And sometimes you also have to look at the solution being presented. Because when I was problem solving this, that was one of the things that I wanted to look at, was the specifics of the solution. Especially because you believed they had orchestrated the problem. So I was like, well, okay, if they're potentially orchestrating a problem, they're also going to orchestrate a solution. And sure as it's not how it's presented at all.
Yeah, I mean, it angers me to say this, but it seems that often you should be equally cynical of the government's proposed solutions as you should be to the problems that they purport. Because every single time that they come forward with solution, not every single time, I'm being hyperbolic here, but oftentimes when they come forward with solutions, especially ones in which the primary messaging seems to be fear-based. Be afraid of TikTok, be afraid of China. China's a big one. Be afraid of immigrants, be afraid of whatever it is. Great replacement theory if you want to go to the far extremes of it. If it always, the more tuned up the fear is, the less ethical the solution tends to be. But they can justify it because they'll galvanize you through the emotional manipulation. This is politics, how it's done currently. It's why year after year, every block of 4 years, a lot of people that I know get together and go, well, what the actually changed? Realistically, you can list the bills, you can list this XYZ, and when you really boil it down, is anything really moving tangibly in one direction or another? Most people that I know say that it isn't. This is part of that problem. This is a major contributor to that issue.
Absolutely. But I would encourage people to make sure that you always stay on point. Always keep doing research. Read everything that you can. Research everything that you can.
And please end headline culture. And what I mean by that is seeing a headline and immediately jumping to a conclusion and sticking to that conclusion before you actually read more deeply into the article. Media outlets and governments are very, very aware at how much our attention is easily diverted and how much we are now being engineered, funny enough, to obtain information in small snippets. We don't do long-form reading and ingestion of information. This is the number one behavior that if you wanted to start making tangible efforts towards that change, that would be where I would tell people to start.
You won't hear a disagreement from me?
Whew.
That was a long episode, but it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to anybody that has continued to support us and watch through the end of this. We hope that you feel that you've learned something, or that you've gained a perspective, or at least a well-rationed argument against your stance that you may not have heard before. This is the kind of stuff that gets us up in the morning and keeps us going. Like I said, I was up till 4 a.m. last night just doing research on all these different talking points because I wanted to make sure that we really hashed it out to the best of our ability, and I know that my co-host did the same. So, you know, we're happy to be able to bring it to you, and hopefully it's been enlightening or positive in some way.
I mean, it's positive for me. So.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, do you wanna end us out tonight?
Yeah, I think that'd be a good place to end it. Yeah.
All right. We can be found on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. Thank you for everyone for listening. I hope you stay safe.
I will try my best to feed some sources for things that I mentioned, so that way I can allow us to give you more insight as to some of the older stories that I mentioned, so that way it doesn't feel like I'm being too aloof with my information. So just be rest assured that I will be including that, and that will be available to anyone that's watching. But other than that, everyone stay safe, build your communities, take care of each other, be kind to each other, and always be intentional with how you ingest information.